I'm Zach. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm going to be the Prime Minister for Dalton, Horace.
I'm Emily. My pronouns are she, her, and I'll be the member of government for Horace.
Hello, everybody. My name is Abigail Chen. I'm going to be the first ops speaker for Campolindo High School. My pronouns are she, her, and my partner is Kylie Wong. She will be the second speaker.
Okay, cool. My name is Laura. My pronouns are she, her. I was an East Coast debater. And I do have a paradigm up. If you have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer. I am open to Ks in theory, however, like where they're necessary or needed.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I go by the pronoun he, him, and I'm from the Philippines. So yeah, I'm also open to case and theory. And I'm more of how you're able to link your arguments to the resolution. And I'm also open to like how you're able to weigh your arguments against the other team. So yeah, that's it.
Awesome, thank you. So then if there are no objections, actually, I guess if you have any POIs, please ask them verbally. If there are no objections, my time will begin on my first word. Our country is at a crossroads. We can continue on a path of ignorance and continue to prioritize the short term, or we can chart a new path and do everything that we can to address the largest problem that humanity has ever faced. A four-part model coming from side government's bench. First, we are going to decrease the funding that is going to fossil fuel subsidies by 5% over the next 5 years. Second, half of the money that the US federal government gains from that is going to go towards the research of hydrogen fuel cell technology. Third, half of this money is going to go towards subsidizing the actual creation of this technology in this country. Fourth, and finally, after these 5 years, we'll reevaluate whether it has been effective, whether more money is needed, and how exactly we can best approach this issue. With that being said, we believe that this debate should be judged under the framework of net benefits. But
POI, or POC, point of clarification.
Yes.
Are you saying that the USFG will decrease fossil fuel funding like from the baseline right now by 5% under your plan?
Yeah, so it's going to be by a total of 25% over the next 5 years, just gradually by 5% every year. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Awesome. Time will resume now. Under the framework of net benefits, we believe that climate change is necessarily going to be the place you look on your ballot. The reason for this is that it has an infinitely larger scope than any possible impact my opponents can mention. Because if we are able to solve the climate crisis, we can quite intuitively avoid extinction. What is the easy response to this? The easy op response is, well, the United States is only one country and we can't necessarily solve the problem. However, we'd say two things. A, we'd say even a small % chance of something that is so large is important enough that we need to focus on it. And second, we'd say that this is the exact rhetoric that has excused inaction on the climate crisis for years, and that if the United States does this, A, they have a moral obligation to, but B, we'd argue that it's going to act as a catalyst for other countries to follow as well. Briefly, before I get into argumentation, I want to provide a brief context on what hydrogen fuel cell technology is. So it is a relatively under-researched piece of technology that can produce electricity by combining hydrogen and oxygen atoms. There are no emissions from this form of fusion. More on that when I get to argumentation. Two independent arguments coming from side government's bench. Our first argument is how it's better than status quo forms of technology. I think the reasoning here is incredibly intuitive. 8.7 million people die early every year due to fossil fuel use, which means that as the most that we can do in terms of a government to move away from fossil fuel usage is going to be net beneficial to society. Why does that happen under the plan? We think that when you start to invest in the research of hydrogen fuel cell technology, it becomes more of a feasible option for people in the United States. There's more buy-in to the technology, both domestically and abroad. But then second, the subsidies parts of the plan quite literally takes money away from fossil fuels, which helps all forms of renewable energy prosper. But then second, specifically means that replacing this fossil fuel energy is likely going to be much of hydrogen fuel cell technology instead. Why is that beneficial? As I said, all of the 8.7 million deaths that come from terrible air quality, horrible emissions from fossil fuels gets erased when you go to a overall net zero emitter, i.e. the hydrogen fuel cell technology. But let's say you don't buy that we're debating against the status quo. Second argument is why hydrogen fuel cell technology is uniquely better than any other form of energy. A few forms of energy we briefly want to touch on here. First is going to be renewables. Second is going to be nuclear energy. Why is hydrogen fuel cell technology uniquely better for the environment than renewable energy? We'd say that because renewable energy doesn't have a base load, it simply cannot be a feasible option to power the entire country. What happens when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow? You see that solar has a capacity factor of 24.5%, while wind has a capacity factor of 34.8%. The implication of this is that even companies that claim to be renewable in the status quo still use fossil fuels for the instances in which they cannot actually garner enough electricity from their renewable sources, which means that in order to actually get to net zero, which is necessary to avert climate catastrophe, we think that you necessarily need not renewable energy that isn't actually wind or solar. Second piece of analysis here, though, is on land. Both wind farms and solar farms both require immense amounts of land. One study found that it literally wouldn't be possible with our current economy to actually allocate enough land for wind and solar to power the entire United States. We'd argue that this is really bad because if you cannot actually power the entire United States with wind or solar, the implication is that you're going to end up relying on fossil fuels, things that I think both teams can agree are probably incredibly harmful. Second, on nuclear energy, two reasons nuclear energy is uniquely harmful. First is on the transportation and building process. Even though nuclear is also is emissionless, because there's so many there's so much emissions in the actual process of constructing nuclear energy plants, it ends up having a massive short-term impact on the environment that simply is unique to nuclear energy and isn't actually symmetric with hydrogen fuel cell technology. But then the second piece of analysis here is on uranium mining, which disproportionately harms indigenous communities. When we see that uranium mining usually happens in these communities, is incredibly dangerous and releases chemicals that kill thousands of people every year. Why is hydrogen fuel cell technology uniquely better? It's incredibly dense, which means that it doesn't actually require that much land. It's also incredibly versatile with zero waste, and also it is abundant, it is limitless. I think that we can all agree that hydrogen and oxygen are literally the two most common elements in the world, which means that when you look to the long term, it is the most feasible long-term solution to the climate crisis. Two impacts here. First is on the environment. I think that you get more of this built in the United States and abroad, but second is combating China, because China has a great number of hydrogen fuel stations, the greatest number of any country worldwide. They have 250 operational hydrogen refueling stations in the country. What we see is that if the United States doesn't put money into it, we're going to end up having to rely on China. Judge, to finally prioritize an issue that has been ignored for too long. Couldn't be prouder to propose.
Okay, the neg is gonna be two sheets on the neg, and then I'm going to go aft, top down. Can everybody hear? Is all the tech going okay? Okay. Is everyone ready? Okay, awesome. Okay. Let me just get a quick drink of water. Give me your computer. Okay. My time. My time starts now. So the first thing, so we want to start my speech off with a dis ad. So first, some uniqueness or what's happening right now. Currently we see that there's a lot of actions to fight climate change in this globe. Specifically, Biden's act to fight climate change is going to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 30 to 40% below 2005 levels by 2030. I.e., in 7 years, we will have decreased our emissions to below levels from 17 years ago. Judge, this is specifically key because you want to leverage this compared to their decreasing fossil fuels by 5% every year, and see that we are keenly reducing our emissions by more than what in this flow, we are reducing our emissions by more than what the affirmation is proposing. But next, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why hydrogen fuel cell technology is specifically bad. So, Judge, when you have to mine hydrogen in order to use it in the real world, hydrogen has to be extracted. And Judge, there are two ways that hydrogen can be extracted. One is through reforming, i.e., hydrogen is extracted from methane sources, and this is keenly bad. We tell you this for a couple of reasons. The production of hydrogen through steam methane reforming, or in other words, SMR, produces emissions that are known to be harmful, including NOx, particulate matter, carbon monoxide, and volatile organic compounds, which cause a lot of the same impacts that the affirmation itself state. Additionally, reforming increases CO2 emissions. You can see specifically Dr. Howard and Mark Z. Jacobson, a professor of civil and engineering and environmental engineering at Stanford and director of its atmospheric energy program, has found that the greenhouse gas footprint of blue hydrogen was more than 20% greater than burning natural gas or coal for heat. Judge, what this means is that the use and production of fuel cell energy is actually seen to be net worse than using a gas or coal. Yes.
So if this technology isn't so efficient in the status quo, why don't we put research into it to make it safer, to make it more environmentally friendly?
We're not saying that it's not efficient. We're saying that the process of extracting hydrogen itself emits CO2. This isn't something that funding or research can solve, right? You can't just put money, for example, if you want to fund fossil fuels and research fossil fuels, that's not going to decrease the carbon emission of fossil fuels. And that's the argument that I'm making here. But some more evidence in case you don't think this is enough. As indicated by SMR and WGS reactions, 100% of the carbon in incoming methane is ultimately converted to CO2. Thus, per 1 million standard cubic feet of hydrogen produced from methane, 250,000 SCF of CO2 will be produced. There are going to be over 19,000 standard cubic feet of carbon dioxide per 1 metric ton. So 1 million standard cubic feet of hydrogen will produce 13 metric tons of carbon dioxide, which is obviously going to be net bad for climate change. But additionally, due to heat losses and inefficiencies, the realistic number in practice in a large hydrogen plant is 21.9 metric tons of CO2 emissions per hydrogen plant. In other words, this converts to 0.28 kilograms of carbon dioxide emissions associated with 1 kilowatt hour of hydrogen production. I.e., all of this goes to show that hydrogen production is not the net zero clean energy that the affirmation leads you to believe. The extraction and production of this material releases so much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But a couple of impacts to this. The first one you're going to see is climate change. The first thing you can do is extend all of my opponents' impacts that they have about climate change, but I would like to add a key few of my own. The first is that climate change is incredibly harmful in today's debate, right? We see that it is irreversible and it has the magnitude of every single individual on this earth. But we're also going to see that climate change specifically harms minorities and it causes structural violence, as we see that countries with less resources abroad are going to be engaging in resource wars, which is going to ultimately be bad. But now I want to move on to my second sheet. Counterplan. USFG should significantly increase funding in electrostasis derived hydrogen fuel cell technology. Electrolysis, derived hydrogen fuel cell technology. I want to give some context into this. So I talked to you a lot about about RMS technology, about RMS hydrogen, right? And we see that there are two ways to isolate hydrogen. The more common way to isolate hydrogen is to extract it from natural gas in a process called reforming. This process is costly and emits carbon dioxide, which is counterproductive to using an emissions-free energy source. The other way of isolating hydrogen is through electrostasis, which uses electricity to isolate hydrogen from water. This allows the use of renewable energy sources, which actually allow net zero. Renewable energy creates about 20% of US electricity, and that percentage continues to grow. As you can see, California is pretty reliant on renewable energy. Sure.
Why can't we do both the plan and the counter plan and put research and subsidize?
Yeah, I'm getting to that. That was my next point. So that, or in other words, competition. So why the counter plan and the plan aren't the same thing. So the first thing you're going to see is that this is a plan minus counter plan, which proves competition by default, right? Like the affirmation is proposing that we put funding into both of these forms of isolating hydrogen. We're telling you that we're specifically not doing one of them. That is two specifically different actions. But additionally, normal ways and means that the funding would go into reforming an electrostasis as a process to get hydrogen, since it's the most common way of currently doing it. Today, 95% of hydrogen produced in the United States is made by natural gas reforming in large central plants. So it stands to reason that 95% of the funding will go into natural gas reforming. This also leads into net benefits, i.e. like another reason you shouldn't do both the affirmation and the negation counter plan, which is that we don't fund natural gas reforming, which is like obviously worse, right? And additionally, like putting 100% into your funding into a clean energy is better than putting 5% of your funding. Okay, now I'm going to go on to the affirmation. Okay. So on their like topic case, yeah, like all of the stuff they said on the top is fine, but I just want you to like clearly put on your flow that in the SQO, like we're currently decreasing emissions by way more than 5%. You can extend what we're decreasing our funding into fossil fuel by more than 5%. You can extend the warrant I said in my first speech about 30 to 40%. Yeah, and then all the context is fine. And then on their first point, we're gonna see that, so they tell you that like 8.7 million people currently die from fossil fuel use. We're going to tell you that like the affirmation provides no solvency mechanism towards this. The only link they provide you to this is basically like hydrogen is clean. However, I spent my entire first speech explaining to you specifically why the production of hydrogen through reforming it causes a lot of carbon dioxide emissions, meaning that they don't actually solve this issue. Additionally, our opponents don't talk to you at all about how much more hydrogen is going to increase, or like whether or not we're just decreasing our reliance from fossil fuel energy from like 90% to like 85%, which really wouldn't create that much of an impact either way. Additionally, my opponents spent a lot of their speech talking about how hydrogen is better than like all these alternate forms of energy, and we tell you that like that's not really what we're advocating for, but I'll like just like go through and repeat it anyways. Hydrogen fuel is only used in cars and like electric. Oh, also whatever. It's like energy sector. Also, I want to clearly point out that hydrogen is only used in electric vehicles, meaning that like most of these things that they talk to you about like renewable energy and solar and nuclear energy doesn't actually come into play here, right? We're talking like more about like electric vehicles and like hydrogen's use under that context. So for all of these and more, I do strong negation ballot. Thank you very much.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Great. I'm just gonna get on my timer. Then I'll begin my speech. Okay. 8 minutes on the clock. Starting now. Judges, 3 things in this speech. First, some top of case framework and observations, then op case, then back to gov case. Okay, what do they say to our plan? First and foremost, they tell us that like funding will already increase by more than 5%. However, on that argument, our plan was to raise this by 5% annually, okay? So we are going to decrease the funding coming from fossil fuel subsidies by 5% over the next 5 years. What does this look like? This essentially means that we are going to basically raise costs for fossil fuels, lower the amount of fossil fuels produced over the next 5 years. So that means 25% after the next 5 years. That's a huge, huge shift. Also, the plan talks about a plan to decrease emissions, not focused on taking money away from subsidies uniquely. Okay, with that, they say that like we essentially have no link to like how, you know, fossil fuel deaths and how this will decrease fossil fuel deaths, but we really do, because if we're decreasing it by this really substantial amount, we're finding an alternative pathway and putting research into this alternative pathway that is going to inevitably decrease the amount of fossil fuel deaths. That's a huge, huge impact. Also, the US, this is the second largest fossil fuel emitter. If we can do anything to decrease these emissions and find an alternative pathway of clean energy, that is a uniquely good thing. Okay, with that, getting into side opposition's case on their first disadvantage, essentially I'd just like to preface this by saying this entire argument is reliant on evidence, not actual logic. So they're basically just citing sources rather than like giving you any type of logic, but I'll still be refuting everything. Okay, so they say that there's a lot of action to fight climate change already in the status quo, and that there's this goal to decrease emissions by 30 to 40% in 2030. Judges, I'd just like to remind you that this is not inevitable. Even though there's this goal that exists, it doesn't mean that we will have decreased emissions by this huge amount in 2030. It's not really feasible on the path we're going. We don't have any kind of substantive plan to decrease emissions while using all these other renewable resources, because as Zach already points out, and I'll get to a little bit later, they're simply not as clean. So that's why we are arguing for the implementation of more carbon funding, more funding for carbon. So yes, while we have this goal to decrease emissions by 30 to 40%, the only way it's actually feasible is by the implementation of more funding for carbon. Our plan on the top additionally, our plan is on the top of the status quo. 5% reduction is not decreasing in fossil fuels use, but subsidy funding. Okay, what we are talking about is decreasing subsidy funding. That's what my opponents are missing. Additionally, my opponents talk about how like hydrogen is actually really bad and it is extracted from methane sources. Okay, yes, right now hydrogen is extracted from methane sources, but what we are talking about is increasing research in it, increasing funding for research. We already know that hydrogen can be split from water. This is a proven method that already exists. With increased funding and research, we can make this method more efficient and effective. They say that you can't research this. But that's simply not true. We know that this method already exists. This is already a proven method. With more money put into funding, this method will simply become more and more accessible. This is a completely clean method, and we think only through this funding, we allow hydrogen production to have this net zero clean energy. Right now, hydrogen yes, we agree, hydrogen is already being extracted from methane resources. This is happening inside opposition's world. In our world, we actually allow a pathway to net zero clean energy through splitting hydrogen from water, becoming more effective. Additionally, they say that like the impact of climate change is exacerbated on our side, but we think this is completely untrue. And I'll get into that a little bit more when I address the counter plan. But we think that like the impact of climate change is actually solved on our side because the US is actually implementing a pathway to create this change. However, let's say you buy everything that they say. It functions as a turn because it is starting to be used to some extent anyway, and we think that making sure it is done better is a good thing. The US has already put a couple $1 billion into hydrogen research. We think that putting more money in our world, they're going to put even more money into hydrogen research, and we think that is the only way to allow it to succeed. So thus you buy all of their points that like, it's already being extracted from methane resources. We think that in our world, we allow it a pathway to be clean. Our world is the only world that solves for that. Okay, next, to address their counter plan. First of all, just like to reassert what Zach said in a POI, we think that like this funding for new renewable energy sources can still exist in our world. Our plan takes fossil fuel subsidies and uses that money to invest that in hydrogen We think there's no reason why the US would put less money into other renewable energy sources in our world. It would actually probably increase the amount of renewable energy in our world because we are setting a precedent. Also for other countries as well, we are setting a precedent for them as well. Additionally, they tell you about electricity, but electricity is not all from renewable energy. It comes from fossil fuels as well. So that's why electricity simply isn't environmentally friendly, isn't a good alternative. Even if you don't buy that this plan can exist in our world, why is investment in hydrogen still better than other renewable resources? We think, as Zach has already shown you, nuclear is not safe. Look to Chernobyl, look to Fukushima. Nuclear accidents are very, very common. Wind and solar are reliant on weather. Hydrogen is a unique, clean form of energy that does not create radiation accidents. It's not unsafe. Increasing funding in it is the only pathway to not lead us onto extinction. They also give you this analysis that 100% in clean funding versus 5% in clean funding, that we would be investing a lot less in clean funding. Again, that's just not true. Biden has already put a plan in place to invest $400 million in renewable energy. There's no reason why us taking money from fossil fuel subsidies would make Biden spend less money in renewable energy. Okay, with that, getting back to our case, what do they say? They essentially say that on our second contention of it being better than any other option, they say that hydrogen is only used for electric vehicles. We think this is simply not true. As Zach already tells you, fuel cells have a variety of applications. Yes, they're used in transportation, but they also can be used as an emergency backup power. They can be used for to power systems like power plants, or to even power laptops and phones and stuff. We don't think that they're simply just used for electric vehicles. And also we think with more research, they will inevitably have many more uses. Additionally, we also think that these other renewables aren't as great. What do we get? Solar and wind are, many people generally do not like them because they're reliant on weather. And also wind turbines have been known to hurt the environments that they are in. These other methods have created a lot of backlash. So these simply aren't as great as hydrogen, which has been proven to be clean. And with more and more funding, it can actually be a clean and feasible method. So in order to solve the climate crisis and help America and the world in the long term, I strongly urge a side government ballot. Thank you.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Sorry, before we begin, can you paste your plan text into the chat? Sorry, I didn't ask for that after the PMC, but.
Sure. That isn't really a thing on these because I can just write down what I have written down.
Sure, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, sorry, organizing my paper really quick. So, okay. I think that the order will be, really quick on the affirmations plan text, and then I'll go into the kind of plan and clarifying a few things, and then I'll go into I'll go into our case and then their case. Yeah. All right, is everyone ready? Oh, my time starts now. We negate this resolution. So jumping right in, you're going to be voting for the negation specifically with okay. You're going to be voting for the negation, first of all, because the affirmation is going to keep up the funding for the fossil fuel industry. If you look at their plan text, they specifically say that funding for fossil fuel will decrease by 5% over the next 5 years. First of all, you have to hold them to their plan text here. They say that they're decreasing it by 5% over the next 5 years. This doesn't mean they're decreasing it by 5% each year, which means that they're only going to be decreasing it by 5%. And this is not nearly enough. And you can see this is much worse in the status quo because the Biden administration is decreasing fossil fuel funding by a lot. They're decreasing it by like 30 to 40%. Like they have they signed like pledges to decrease greenhouse gas emissions to 30 to 40% below 2005 levels. This is a huge decrease compared to right now. And the affirmations plan is actually keeping up fossil fuel funding because they're only decreasing it by 5%, whereas in the status quo, it would be decreased by, let's say, like 60 to 70% over the next 5 years. Okay. On to our counter plan. So the first thing the negation the affirmation reads is that like basically a perm, so like the counterplan can exist in both worlds. However, we're not saying that the counterplan can't exist. We're saying that the affirmation is putting money into both reforming and electrolysis, which are the two ways of getting hydrogen. And we're saying that our counterplan is to only put funding into electrolysis, which is going to be much better because reforming emits carbon dioxide. This is a key reason you're going to be voting negation in this round because electrolysis solves all of their impacts. When you make electricity out of yeah.
If we're only putting funding into electrolysis, how does this account for like, does this work under Biden's plan to like decrease emissions by 30 to 40%? Because I think he's also putting money into reforming as well.
That's
the debate.
Yeah, we're saying that instead of putting it into both reforming and electrolysis, we should just put it into electrolysis. Like that's the counter plan that we're doing. Okay, yeah. Yeah, we're saying that we solve all of their impacts because we get this hydrogen fuel, but we don't use carbon dioxide while we're producing it. We take it from water, which is much better because it doesn't emit carbon dioxide, which is the #1 driver of climate change. Okay, they also don't read any like disadds to our counter plan. Like they just say that it's not competitive, which again, we have net benefit competition. We prove that the counter plan is better than the plan, and therefore you should vote for the counter plan because it solves the impacts of the plan. They also talk about how other renewable energy is worse, but we're just talking about like other types of hydrogen. We're not talking about these like solar panels and wind turbines. We're not talking about this stuff. We're just talking about electrolysis. And okay, you're going to extend that normal ways and means that they're going to be putting funding into reforming, like natural gas reforming as a way to get hydrogen. They completely dropped this. So because like 95% of hydrogen comes from natural gas reforming right now, which means that if under their plan, the money is going to go into reforming, which is bad as we've proven. And I'll go into this right now. Okay. So first of all, they say that like we're reliant on evidence and not logic. This is completely not true. Like the logic is that from hydrogen from natural gas comes from natural gas. Like by the law of conservation, the carbon from natural gas has to go somewhere, and it goes into carbon dioxide because that's just how chemistry works. We give you statistics to back this up. We say that like 100% of carbon from the methane will go into carbon dioxide, and it will emit like billions of tons of carbon dioxide if we use reforming on a large scale. And this is obviously much worse than electrolysis, which gets it from water, which doesn't have carbon in it, so it doesn't emit carbon dioxide. Like that is the logic behind our entire case, and the affirmation just completely dropped it. Yeah, and like again, they tell you that they solve climate change, but first of all, we solve it better, and second of all, they don't solve because they're still going to be emitting carbon dioxide. Yeah. Is there anything else?
You should go line by line.
Okay. They also tell you that like subsidy funding is key, but we're also getting this funding like from the same source, and we're also like putting funding into electrolysis. Oh, and they also say that like we can put research into electrolysis so that it becomes more efficient. We're not saying that doesn't disprove our point. We're not saying that electrolysis is inefficient. We're saying that the act is putting money into both reforming and electrolysis, and we should just focus on electrolysis instead because that is better. And they also said that like putting money into in general will make it emit less carbon dioxide. This is not true because you can't change methane and you can't change carbon into another element through more science. It's just not how the law of conservation works. Like unless you can put funding into it until Newton is suddenly wrong, it's just not how it works. Okay. Onto the negation affirmation case. Okay. So again, we're going to be winning because we solved all of the affirmations impacts with our counterplan. And second of all, okay, they tell you that they do have a link because they're using an alternate pathway and like hydrogen is used in cars and everything. But like again, we tell you that hydrogen from electrolysis does the same thing, but it's better because it doesn't emit carbon dioxide in its production. And then you're also going to be voting neg because funding into natural gas based hydrogen is bad. It's uniquely bad because we're on set to run out of fossil fuels, including natural gas, in the next 50 years. So if we put funding into hydrogen, which comes from natural gas right now, the natural gas is going to run out. That's going to be worse for everyone because we just wasted all this money. Yeah. So for all these reasons, I urge a strong vote for negation. Thank you.
Okay, so in this speech, I'm just going to be collapsing a little bit. I'll talk about like a couple of key pieces.
Sorry to interrupt. You cut out for me.
Yeah, I kind of figured because you guys all like went frozen.
Okay.
I'll just like repeat. I'm just gonna talk about like a couple of key voter issues or like pieces of clash, and be explaining to you really clearly how the negation. Okay.
Awesome.
Is everyone ready? Okay. Okay. My time starts now. So there's a couple key pieces of clash in this debate, and I'm going to be going over them one by one. The first and most obvious one is at the counter plan. So when you go to vote for this debate, the first place you have to look is there. Okay, so at best, the affirmative, like even if you believe that even if you buy like there's pseudo perm that like the negation and the affirmation like are the same thing and they can be done at the same time, even if you believe that they are competitive, the affirmation is going to be funding electrostasis less than the counter plan. So we tell you that under the affirmation, 90% of the funding would likely go to reforming. You can extend my partner's orientation and her analysis on this. The negations counter plan is uniquely better because 100% of the funding is going to electrostasis. It goes completely throughout this entire debate that reforming is really bad. It produces methane and it's really bad for the environment, right? That goes dead drop in this debate. So you have to buy that electrostasis is better. And given that kind of orientation, you should buy that it is better that 100% of the funding goes to electrostasis, hydrogen research and creating that versus only like 5% under the affirmation. But even if you buy the affirmations with orientation, that like it's more likely that even more research is going to go to electrostasis energy because like that's like logically what would happen. Like you still have to buy that at least some percentage of the funding is going to be going into reforming like RMS technology. And under that kind of a viewpoint, you still have to vote for the negation because like any percentage that's less than 100% is like worse than 100%. right? And just like a quick preempt here, don't let them come up in the PMR and tell you that like 100% of their funding is going to be going into electrostasis energy. This is like that would be a complete moving target and a complete shift from their original advocacy, which does not tell you anything about like putting 100% of their money into electrostasis. It does not specify, so like that would be a complete shift in moving target, and you shouldn't let them do that. Okay. But even if you don't buy the counter plan, I think you can still vote on the negation on just like your like link work. So if you want to evaluate like the affirmations advantage versus the negations disad, the first place you're going to be looking is uniqueness, right? And under this, you're going to be seeing that by the negation plan, they're only decreasing their fossil fuel funding by 5%. What this means is that this doesn't even nearly rival what's going on in the SQO, i.e. Biden's like decrease in funding to pre-2005 levels by 30 to 40%. But even if you don't buy this uniqueness warrantation, you're going to be looking onto the link level, and where you're going to be looking at whether or not this policy is going to be decreasing or increasing emissions. The affirmation provides you no warrantation on how how specifically hydrogen fuel cell technology is going to decrease emissions. They tell you that it's like an alternate pathway, which is like better, but like that doesn't like provide solvency, right? Like an alternate pathway that like produces carbon dioxide is still an alternate pathway, and that's not going to solve climate change either. We provide you really key statistics on how hydrogen plants increase carbon emissions. If you want to look to a key statistic, you can extend that like a large hydrogen plant would produce 21.9 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions per hydrogen plant. This is a huge amount of carbon dioxide production. You can look that the affirmation doesn't touch this at all. They do not tell you like that this is not true or provide you like a way of creating like making that number zero, i.e. creating the effect that the affirmation is going to increase carbon dioxide emissions if you pass. So for all these reasons and more, I urge a strong negation vote. Thank you very much.
Incredible. Is anybody not ready? Then time will begin on my first word. Don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. In today's debate, side opposition has continuously provided an uncomparative case where they claim that our side isn't perfect, but don't actually defend their own. Couldn't be prouder to propose. 3 things in this speech. First, I'm going to go over 2 observations, then 2 independent government ballots. Let's start on the plan text. First of all, like this just isn't how like it is done on the East Coast. Those were notes so I would know what to say. I very clearly said in PMC that we were going to make it 25%. Like I really don't want that to be how this round is decided, but if not, so be it. But then second piece of analysis I want to make here, and I think it's important, is that we uniquely say that this money is going to be taken away from fossil fuel subsidies and is going to get put towards this technology. That means that it's in addition to the status quo, which means even if you do buy it's 5% instead of 25%, yes, that decreases the power of our offense, but it doesn't take it out. We'd still say that this is unique offense for us because we're still doing something on top of the current plan. We were taking funding away from something new and putting it towards this new technology. And we don't think that this is a good, fair place to vote. Second observation I briefly want to make. My opponents try to claim that the counter plan and the plan aren't really the same thing. But A, look to the definitions, and B, look to the analysis you get from Emily's speech. What do we tell you? We tell you, and as like defined or as I gave the observation in my PMC, that literally hydrogen fuel cell technology is just like making sure you're combining hydrogen and oxygen atoms. So that means that all of their arguments about natural gas, all of their arguments about how exactly we're doing it are literally just arguing for the government. They're making our case for us. But let's take my opponents at their highest ground. Let's say that they do access a unique form of kind of this combining atoms, which is reliant on renewable energy or electricity. That leads me into my first ballot, which is why overall that hydrogen fuel cell technology is comparatively better than the electricity they talk about. Remember, look back at your flow judge. Every single statistic that they provide is only on why hydrogen fuel cell technology is not perfect, not why it is comparatively better. That's where you look to Emily's and my 3 layers of analysis. We tell you A, that electricity is not all from renewable energy, it also comes from fossil fuels. This goes clean conceded in the op block. It's a unique place to vote, insofar as they drop our argument that fossil fuels are independently worse. But beyond that, I give you 2 warrants in my case that they tried to just ignore and don't engage with because it's not relevant to the debate. What do we tell you? We tell you that renewables are uniquely worse because they take up immense amounts of land and their capacity factor makes it infeasible for them to completely replace fossil fuels. That's important because that means that side opposition implicitly concedes that in their world, they're going to be reliant on fossil fuel technology, at least to some extent. Why does that win us the round? We'd say that A, just like carbon dioxide emissions is overall going to be the most important voter. All of their environmental arguments don't actually focus on CO2 uniquely. But then second, we'd say even under the umbrella of carbon monoxide, even if you buy that renewable energy is better, take them once again at their highest ground, we'd say it isn't feasible because you can't actually make it implemented on a full nationwide basis, which means that the only counterfactual clean conceded out of PMC and MG is fossil fuels. That's the comparative my opponents try to run away from throughout this entire debate. Go to our second argument. Emily reads you perhaps the most brilliant piece of analysis that you've heard in this debate. What does she tell you? You can buy their entire case. You can buy that overall hydrogen fuel cell technology is terrible. But insofar as we've already put billions of dollars into it, we may as well research it to make sure it is done better and safer for the environment. Because it's going to be done to some extent in either world. But in our world, you actually research it to make sure it's done safer. Insofar as that issue, you get conceded offense. This is the first place you look on probability, because even if you buy their case, it still actually triggers. But then second, we'd argue that like, even though all of the other impacts are somewhat speculative, we see that research independently cannot create harm. It's going to be out there. The question is, how do we handle the technology? We say you have to research it. Couldn't be prouder to propose.
Good job.
Yeah, great round,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you to the judges.
Yeah, that was an awesome round.
Volunteering.
Watch. So yeah, I'm just gonna fill out the ballot and then get back.
Awesome. Thank you again for
Thank
judging.
you.
Okay, looks like the ballot's in. So I'll just give the results. It seems to be a unanimous decision for side government. Um, so I'll just get into my RFD. First of all, I want to say that like this wasn't an easy decision. This was like very, very close, and it took me examining the flow sheet a lot. At no point in the debate did I think there was like a clear winner, and honestly, like by the time like rebuttals came, I was like sitting there like, oh my God, like how the fuck am I gonna adjudicate this? Like this is hard. However, that being said, I felt like there were some really important distinctions that came out of the prime minister's weighing in their rebuttal, which sort of like crystallized the round in a helpful way for me to cast a ballot for side affirmative. And they did this in several ways. So like when we're looking at the counter plan versus the plan, I feel bad saying this, but like I'm a judge who's going in with like effectively no knowledge of chemistry. I'm a social science major. So in like determining like, okay, so like which technology is better and which is worse, like I didn't really know how to make a ruling because I was like, well, I don't know. Like one side is saying this one is worse for these reasons, and another side is saying this other one is worse for those reasons. And so I kind of had to like consider like which is better as sort of a wash. Like I couldn't really rule on it because I just like I don't have that spec knowledge, or maybe it's not spec knowledge, maybe I'm just a moron, but like whatever, I didn't know. And then so I kind of had to like look at I had to like consider on-side asks sort of like clever analysis that like, well, we've like all conceded through discussing Biden's plan and like the like whatever like a decrease in like carbon emissions and like how like then the US federal government is going to like invest in this new technology anyway. We have to like think about, well, since this is going to occur in the status quo anyway, like what is the harm of actually like putting more research and focus into making this like a cleaner source? And to me, like yes, that was like pretty much a round winning point, because then I was like, okay, well, this is all going to happen anyway. It's kind of a wash as to like whether or not like electrolysis is better. Maybe it's not a wash. I just don't know. I'm sorry. Like both sides claiming either thing. So it's kind of like, well, like I think then they do get marginal advantages because like it's pretty hard to like not buy the logic that like further research and further money can like make something like more effective or be managed better if this is like going to happen anyway. And like I thought that was like an important distinction, and like I just thought they like warranted out that a little better. Like the links were clearer for me as like a social science major, whereas I thought this side op did sort of rely on like evidence and science rather than reasoning for like why electrolysis was better. And like I couldn't like adjudicate based on that because like I just like didn't really like know. So I kind of like and then with like the contentions, yeah, again, like I just had to buy side ops marginal benefits through that analysis in the PM speech. And like I think like side op didn't really prove how side apps technology would be uniquely harmful if like the government's plan was enacted. They just proved how it could be harmful in like the status quo currently without effectively proving why the alternative would necessarily be better, considering apps' reputations to that and their discussions of like the issues with clean energy, etc. So yeah, that was basically my RFD, but it definitely was not an easy decision. So really good round.
Okay. Is it okay if I turn off my camera? Like my internet connection is fluctuating. But I was able to hear everyone debate earlier, regardless. So yeah, let's go through the RFP. So basically, the way I adjudicated this round is based on two metrics. Firstly, on comparative analysis, and secondly, on responsiveness, or the way you're able to employ your rebuttals and adapt to it. So first, on the on the metric of comparative analysis, insofar as opposition is able to explain that the harms of hydrogen technology are present in such a way that there's going to be increase in carbon dioxide emissions as a result of extraction of hydrogen. It's unclear as to how of hydrogen analysis or the impacts of the harms that you can get from carbon dioxide emissions from the hydrogen extraction is worse, or like is way worse, or will lead to worse outcomes as compared to what's already happening in status quo. But secondly, it's also unclear as to why are the current technology on solving climate change, or the current technology on renewable energy, or even nuclear energy are far better than hydrogen technology. Comparatively, this is where government was able to be better, because number one, they were able to explain the necessity and even the extent of solvency of hydrogen technology. They did this by explaining on how problems with the current technology that we have right now is that like when you talk about renewable energy according to government, there's no base load. It's not really a feasible option because it don't yield much energy if the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't flow enough. And even extended by telling us the transportation and building process, problems of nuclear energy and the way uranium mining disproportionately harms indigenous community. Then they're able to link then the benefits that you're able to get from hydrogen technology. So number one, they're more likely going to like be better environment, and you're able to even combat China as a leverage if you're going to push with hydrogen technology. So this proves that number one, government was better in trying to explain that the current technology status quo is not enough or is worse in trying to solve climate change. And secondly, they were able to explain how hydrogen technology is better. But even more so, even in the extent that opposition was able to provide us a counter plan and prove that it's still that you're still going to get increased benefits through hydrolysis alone, and even extended to explaining to us how you're able to increase funding on alternative technology. Number one, it's unclear as to how is it comparatively better and uniquely better through the plan provided by government, because there's no mutual exclusivity. It's unclear what is the mutual exclusivity of you getting hydrolysis alone or you getting increasing funding alone to alternative technology. But secondly, it's unclear as to how status quo is still ultimately better than the plan provided by side government. This is why in the first metric of comparative analysis, side government won. So let's move on to the second metric on responsiveness, or the way in which you're able to adapt throughout the entire debate. Insofar as opposition was able to explain again that the harms of hydrogen are there, and even extended by telling us on how climate change, for example, harms minorities, causes structural violence. They weren't able to adapt directly to how government was able to build their arguments. Why did I say this? Number one, the comparative analysis that government has given were met with little or insufficient analysis in trying to by opposition. The comparative analysis of renewable and nuclear energy weren't responded enough, or weren't rebutted enough by opposition. The strongest response that I get from opposition was them telling us that you're still going to emit much carbon dioxide. Even if this is theoretically and even realistically true or logically true, it's unclear as to what is the extent or impact of carbon dioxide emission again that you're going to get that makes them worse than what's already happening to hydrogen technology. But furthermore, the counterplan that opposition was provided weren't revealed or weren't given enough layers of analysis, even after government was able to explain that it can also happen in their side, and even better through research. Because the government's able to respond then or rebut that number one, the counterplan that opposition can get or opposition provided can still be solved through research, for example. And furthermore, government also claim that they're also going to be better, that they're better because they're also they can still copy it, can happen on both sides. So opposition then has the burden to prove to us on how number one, the counterplan is still better or more mutually exclusive than the alternative provided by government. And number two, how they are already uniquely better than the alternative given by government, which I personally found as number one, having insufficient analysis as to why is the counter plan still far better than the plan provided by government. But secondly, how you're still going to get more benefits or more unique benefits through the counter plan, and how it trickles down to the benefits of like clean energy or even less harms than the carbon dioxide emissions that opposition claim that hydrogen technology can emit. So with that said, all the best to the teams. Congratulations and commiserations.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and good luck, guys, in the rest of the tournament.
You too.
Good luck.